Of all the superheroes in all the comics in all the world, I love me some Batman. He's simply the easiest hero to make good art out of. He's the most human of all the superheroes that I'm aware of. He has no superpowers to overshadow the substance of a story. He has a relatable, albeit exaggerated, backstory, and he is very mysterious. There have been countless reinterpretations of this character since his creation. We had a television series which celebrated the sillier aspects of a man dressing up as a bat and seems to have a gadget for everything. There have been some excellent video games, a stellar cartoon series, and of course some really good graphic novels. I love all of these things, yet before Batman Begins, the live-action Batman films never really did it for me, with the exception of the film based on the comedy series, which I love, but is really too different to compare to the rest of them. The first two serious films were nothing but a bunch of admittedly excellent set design and performances, but with no real story or substance to them. The next two Batman films were at best watered down and generic, and at worst, Batman and Robin. With the death of the franchise in 1998, it was beginning to look as though we would never get a film that represents the best qualities of a Batman story. But then Christopher Nolan came along to not only save the franchise, but also make it thrive. Batman Begins was the first real Batman film, and I don't mean that it was the first film to do the Batman story justice. It was the first Batman film that aimed at making a good movie, rather than just an entertaining superhero movie. In fact, for the first half of this film, we don't see Batman at all. What we see is the genesis of Batman, the all-too-human Bruce Wayne struggling with his pain and trying to figure out what he wants to do with it. He meets up with the League of Shadows and is trained to be a great ninja, but this doesn't give him a goal. He provides that for himself. All of this is determined by the kind of man he is, and he makes decisions based on all of his best qualities. He will not kill. He will not write off even the worst criminals as a lost cause. He will fight them, but he will not take their life. Within the first hour or so of the film, we get flashbacks that help put this all in perspective. We learn very important things that the first Tim Burton film never bothered to explore. Why is he called Batman? Why will he not kill? Why is he doing this in the first place? Unlike the Tim Burton films, Batman Begins is actually telling this story. Bruce is not just doing this because he's screwed up. He is doing it because he wants to believe that the Forsaken can still be saved. This is an interesting take on the character because in most interpretations of Bruce Wayne, he isn't nearly this optimistic. But as the second act of the film rolls around, we see this Bruce as an optimist indeed. He has a confidence about him in the face of an entire city of criminals. He comes back prepared, and as he learns to understand his own fears, he now knows how to use them against his enemies. That right there is the true heart and soul of this film. That right there is what this film is about. It's about not being afraid. Fear has been a common theme in most of the incarnations of Batman, and this movie puts that in the thematic forefront better than any incarnation I've seen. The movie is about overcoming your fears, about understanding them and using them. The Scarecrow being one of the film's primary villains brilliantly puts that into focus. Every encounter with the Scarecrow forces Batman to literally confront his own fears. Sometimes they win out and defeat him, and sometimes he is able to use it against his enemy. On the surface, this is a very good comic book plot revolving around a madman's plan to hold a city for ransom and an organization's plan to destroy the city outright. But it's the themes of this film, carried by a good story, that make this a great Batman film. As we watch Bruce Wayne create Batman in the image of his own fear and wants for justice, it just gives you a good feeling. Not only because of the adventure and excitement of watching him do his thing and learn from his mistakes, but we also get a great feeling of optimism that one person really can make a difference in the face of overwhelming challenges. This movie never uses novelty to try and rope you in the way that the earlier films did by introducing the villains of the week in every film. This film has two villains that may not be as well known to newcomers as the Joker and the Riddler, yet they're excellent villains because they work well in the story. They aren't just here to impress us with their presence. But it's the hero that ultimately steals the show. Christian Bale as Bruce Wayne is very different from most of the takes on this character, especially in the earlier films. In those films, Bruce was just as mysterious as Batman. He lived his life close to the chest, even when it came to those closest to him. Here, Bruce isn't mysterious at all, and really, nor is Batman. Interestingly enough, Batman is probably the least interesting character on the face of it. You don't get the same thrill watching him do his thing as you did in the original film, because we are treated to seeing how he is doing what he does, and how he makes everything look mysterious, when in fact it's all very down to earth. We get to go behind the scenes and learn the process behind all the magic tricks, so while we can take satisfaction in knowing that it all seems supernatural to everyone else, we know what's going on. Everyone is going to have their own opinion about that strategy, but personally, I see this as being a tremendous advantage for the film, because once again, this movie is not just about Batman doing Batman things. The reason I believe the approach works better than keeping all of these things a mystery is because we aren't just seeing how the Batman is pulled off, we learn why it's being pulled off. We witness Bruce's ingenuity, his strategy of bringing down crime. It may take away from the mystique of the character in the original film, but it helps us to understand and relate to the character far better in this one. Thus, it gives us a better character that we can more easily care about, rather than just being thrilled by the mystery. We are participants in Bruce's own creation. There is more substance in learning who someone is and why and how they're doing this than just passively watching a guy do stuff and wondering what it's all about. The supporting cast is superb, except for the casting of Rachel Dawes. It is impossible to accept this idiot as a district attorney. She looks, talks, and acts like a dumb high school kid. The character is atrocious, has no personality, and doesn't know how to do anything but get kidnapped and act dumbly violent whenever she's unhappy with something. Rachel Dawes sucks, but everyone else is spot on. Michael Caine plays an interesting take on Alfred, making him more like a father figure rather than a butler. He has a lot to teach Bruce, and he does it with dignity and charm. Morgan Freeman is great as Lucius Fox. He's the genius everyman who adores seeing his work put to good use. Liam Neeson, of course, needs no introduction, and Cillian Murphy as Dr. Crane is positively chilling. The thing about the villains as well as the superheroes is that this all feels down to earth and real. Even when doing silly things like flying above rooftops and shooting people with crazy gas, these do not feel like comic book heroes and villains. These are real people behind these masks. The relationship between Batman and Gordon is a great part of the Batman story that has always been ignored in these films. Finally, this is represented well in a Batman movie. Bruce and Gordon have a lot in common. They are both underdogs who want to stand against crime and injustice, and each brings out the best in the other. In addition to adding a lot to the story, all of Bruce's companions help to give Batman's gadgets and locations plausibility as well. Just how does one dressed like a bat have a huge tank in their garage and save the streets of Gotham without being noticed? This film actually makes that believable, and it does it with flair and fun. While it's impossible for superpowers to override a story in a Batman film, it is possible for gadgets to override them, and this has been the case in every live-action Batman film thus far. All of Batman's high-tech weaponry are put to good use in this story, but that's not to say that on its own personal level, the Bat Tank isn't awesome. Because the Bat Tank is awesome. This film has something to offer to everyone. Fans of Batman comics will love this film as it does many different things with the story and characters it presents, while still remaining true to the core of the source material. People who don't know that much about the Batman comics will find themselves in for a great interpretation of some of the comic book stories, as well as a great original story on its own, and just a great time in general. Batman Begins is about the origins of Batman, and it tells that story masterfully. But it's also a film about not being afraid, about standing up against fear. Batman is an amazing character with so many aspects, themes, and stories to explore. And this is the first live-action film that I felt really used that to its full potential. This film also ushered in the era of the reboot, which gave any franchise thought to be dead a new lease on life, and it also changed the way people normally perceive a superhero film must be. Superhero films can be great films too. It is impossible to overestimate how important this film was to films in general, but one thing is certain, at least for me. Batman Begins was the world's first great Batman film.